I have a love-hate relationship with Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5.
Thanks, Captain Obvious.
It mostly stems from the fact that the original anime had a brilliant running start, an amazing concept, and to be frank, its characters were very fun. The real issue stems from the second half of the series, and not to repeat myself, but it really rushed through a lot of things and gave us some very terrible villains. See my Leo Akiba video for my thoughts on that. But we're not talking about the anime today. No, instead we're talking about the manga adaptation of Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5. Yes, I know, Mangakamen actually talking about an actual manga? It's the end of the world as we know it! Honestly, despite my name, I really tend to focus on games and animation on this channel, so I figured, hey, let's actually talk about manga for once. Trust me, we'll get to that soon. Spoilers for the Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5 manga and the anime, cause for a good portion of it, it's actually a really good manga. But first...
Are you winning, son?
Aside from the first Yu-Gi-Oh! Series, most of the manga adaptations of Yu-Gi-Oh! Are actually separate universes from their respective anime, each doing their own thing and having some very drastic changes. I've touched on this a few times in the past, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5 does change things up quite a bit in its manga. Hell, one thing it does is cut out a lot of the cast from the original anime. The basic plot is this. A mysterious entertainment duelist arrives in Miami City, known as the Phantom. This Phantom is actually Yuya Sakaki, a young duelist from 2 decades in the future, sent back to the past by his father to locate the Genesis Omega Dragon, or God card, a card that has the ability to manipulate reality. Yes, Yuya went back to the past. We're literally doing Back to the Future. In more ways than one, but more on that later. Yuya is not the only time traveler, as Reishi Akiba, as the CEO of the Leo Corporation, is also from the future and is after Yuya, under the impression that a great calamity will happen in the future is caused by Yuya's father Yugioh when he stole the God card from Reishi's father Leo Akiba. In addition, we quickly learn that Yuya shares his body with 3 alternate personalities, Yuto, Yugioh, and Yuri, which later in the manga we learn are the spirits of his older brothers who merged with Yuya to protect him from the destruction of the future. Another notable character is Yuzu Haragi, who is essentially extorting Yuya to join her father's duel school and earn big money, because she's extremely money hungry in this version. Throw in the fact that both Yuya and Reiji have targets on their heads because they possess something called the Atom Factor. To make a long story short for this video, the Atom Factor has the ability to limit the God card's power. And as such, they're pursued by the manga's main antagonist, Eve, who seeks to extract the Atom Factor from the 2 of them so they can properly use the God card. It's at the very least an intriguing plot. And hey, there's only about 45 chapters of this story. That's about 7 volumes worth of content, and I'll say this, in comparison to the actual anime, the manga fixes a lot of the issues I have with it. Though obviously there are some other flaws happening here, and again, there is that title that's looming down below, but let's not focus on that right now. Let's talk about the positives of the manga. Immediately, one thing I have to give the manga is that the cast isn't super bloated. We don't have any of the legacy characters who didn't add anything to the anime for the most part. We have a much more dedicated cast, and the new characters that are introduced in the manga feel like they're more original and not adaptations of pre-existing characters. If you've been a long-time watcher on my channel, you know that a lot of the media that I've talked about in the past has a big issue with casting, and how bloated casts can cause a big issue for a lot of the media I've talked about. And hey, we still get a few fan-favorite characters that show up in the manga from the anime, like my personal favorite being Sawatari.
But for the first and probably last time, I actually agree with you. I mean, people change. Look at me. I used to be handsome and now I'm gorgeous.
I mean, look at him here. He's gorgeous! Then you've got Kurosaki and Sora, 2 characters that I kinda wanna talk about in the future, but they're in the manga too! Ultimately speaking, we've got about 12 characters for the actual main plot of the story, which sounds like a lot, but considering that there's more action-based characterization and there aren't so many other characters like an Arc 5 anime that are vying for attention, it's a breath of fresh air. Sure, we don't have the glory that is Gongedzika and his super heavy samurais or the return of Jack Atlas, but you know what the best part is? No crow! Of course, I joke around, but one example of the characterization I think is done better in the manga would be, well, our main character, Yuya. One of the biggest complaints I had with the original anime with Yuya's characterization, and I know for a fact I wasn't the only one, was the fact that the guy kept on spiraling with his Igao mindset. And for those who don't know what that is, it means the whole dueling is supposed to bring smiles isn't shoved down your throat in the manga. Hell, Yuya, in the manga version, comes off as a more playful kid, because while he does want to make people smile with dueling, it doesn't come off as obnoxious. obnoxious, nor does he wallow in depressive mindsets about it like in the anime. Not to mention, it was a pleasure I could see Yuya interact with his brothers. In the anime, with the U-boys, there wasn't a lot of chemistry between them. Hell, I'm pretty sure Yuya never actually spoke to Yugioh at all in the show. Yuta had the most interaction with Yuya, but it's hard to not do that when Yuya absorbed him. It's weird for me to say that, but my point is that even though these four characters were essentially a quarter of Zark, we never actually got any meaningful interaction between them outside of Yuya and Yuto, and then Yugo and Yuri. Even Yuri's characterization was unique and vastly different from the psychopathic duelist he was in the anime. I think it was a great idea to essentially give them a brotherly relationship, with Yuto, Yuri, and Yugo doing what they could to protect Yuya from remembering the trauma of them, well, dying.
All of you are dead!
It was great to see a different take on the characterization. You know what else is great? The fact they have a lead female antagonist in a piece of Yu-Gi-Oh media. It's a miracle! What about Yubel? Yubel is hard for me to say about them. I should redo that video sometime. I don't know, if you guys want to see that remake, put it in the comments. Come play with me, Jaden. And 5k likes and I'll do that.
What if I said yes?
Anyway, Eve as a villain is honestly an interesting case. While she certainly doesn't have a lot of the time in the manga, she still was pretty effective as a villain. Especially her motivations that make her really come off as realistic. A woman whose lover, a scientist named Adam, was basically turned into the Adam Factor I brought up earlier. Her motivation is basically to get her lover back, which is essentially to take the two pieces of the Adam Factor that Yuya and Reishi have with them. The motivation may sound eerily familiar.
Wow, that's significantly more mundane.
Especially if you watched my Leo Akiba video, because, yeah, that's essentially a parallel to what Leo's story was, whose motivation was to revive his daughter Rei, who was split up into 4 other characters. It's the same motivation, but Eve is handled a lot better, mainly because 1, she doesn't take it to the extreme that Leo did by basically propagandizing an entire dimension to become warmongers, and 2, she didn't do dumb stuff that I complained about with Leo, like raising a psychopath that was part of a greater evil that he apparently wanted to stop, but then did everything in his power to actually make that evil revive. It's a low bar, but regardless, in comparison to Leo, Eve is actually a pretty decent villain. And hey, she isn't instantly forgiven for her crimes. Hell, even though she does reunite with Adam, it's heavily implied that she does it in the afterlife, and it feels a lot more satisfying a conclusion than what we got in the anime for Leo. There are other antagonists, but I feel like you guys should be the ones to dive into them, because there are some fun ones here. But that would require spoiling a lot. One other aspect about this manga, Reishi actually comes off as an actual rival character. I'll have to revisit my rival videos sometime for this fall, but one thing I didn't like about Arc 5 was that there really wasn't a rival-like character for Yuya. Rivals are an obvious staple in the Yu-Gi-Oh franchise. You got Kaiba, you got Manjome, Sanda, you got Jack Atlas, and while you can stretch what a rival is in this franchise, one thing you'll at least see is that they at least interact with the lead character. Again, in the anime, Yuya and Reishi barely interacted, and when they do, it was more in an argumentative fashion. There wasn't really a connection between the two that could actually instill a rivalry. Hell, if you were to ask me, I'd say the actual rival character in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5 anime was Sawatari. At least when Yuya and him dueled and Sawatari lost, he actually grew by evolving his deck to counter the pendulum summoning methods. Meanwhile, in the manga, the rivalry between Yuya and Reishi is born from a misunderstanding on Reishi's part due to, in part, Leo Akiba's dying words warning Reishi that Yuya is a threat to the world because of him trying to seek the God card. And as such, Reishi gathers a team to stop Yuya. It's why the final duel between the two in the manga, there's an actual connection, and Reishi, despite everything, gets into the spirit of entertainment duels, even running like a goober, and he's crazy fast! With the duel ending in Yuya's favor, and him and Reishi actually laughing at the end of it all. And then, Yuya showing that he was never after the God card to destroy the future, he tears it up. It's actually a lot more fulfilling rivalry and end to the story because there's an actual connection between the two that's used to fuel it. And I want to make it clear, there's a lot of good in the manga. Don't get it twisted. But that doesn't stop it from having some issues, including Despite me liking a lot about the things of Arc 5's manga, there are a number of issues to it. One of the bigger ones is that after the first duel they're in, Sawatari and Kurosaki just don't really matter in the manga. Kurosaki in the original Arc 5 anime was the best friend with Yuto, the XC's counterpart to Yuya, but that doesn't exist in the manga. Same with the fact that Kurosaki's sister Ruri doesn't exist either. And then there's the fact that the backstory was wiped clean, and Kurosaki has very little backstory, which was essentially him pulling a Ryo Marufuji and dueling in underground duels. Probably faced off opponents like this.
That's why, Poopyhead! My mommy says I'm really strong!
God damn it, Sean! Now, if you ask people who have watched the Arc 5 anime, you'll probably be told more often than not that Kurosaki was probably one of the best characters in the anime. He had a lot of baggage with his past, having lost his friends, his family, and his duels were practically intense. After his duel, he would essentially become supportive for Reiji in the manga. Though to be fair, Kurosaki does get the Yugioh psycho face. Salvatore is pretty much the same as he is in the anime. The only difference is that he doesn't have the character growth of becoming an entertainment duelist like he does in the anime after losing to Yuya so many times. He's still a big goofball, but he also basically becomes a Reiji supporter. And then you get one of the bigger issues, and that would be Yuzu as a character. If you've watched any of my videos, you'll know that I have a lot of issues with how Yuzu was treated in the second half of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5 anime. She was essentially turned into a damsel in distress despite the fact that she had a very strong start in the series. Meanwhile, in the manga, you know how there's the that girl trope, basically the token girl character? Yuzu doesn't duel at all in the manga. And while that's not a death nail in the character, it's more that Yuzu acts as more of what you'd think of a stereotypical anime girl. She's a more greedy cheerleader in the manga, mainly because she's trying to earn money for her father's duel school, and is only going to pay Yuya 500 yen an hour. To make it clear, that's like about $3 an hour, and I thought I was cheap with my editors. She basically also tricks Yuya to work for her under the guise of an autograph. I actually like that because sometimes there's something to be said about greedy characters who are swindlers, and I think this would be fine. Hell, she was able to scam Yuya into working with her, but the problem is that the rest of Yuzu's character becomes a bit more of a typical of an anime girl, even almost stereotypical. For example, when Yuya summons a pair of monsters that are cute girls that are well endowed, this is her reaction. Also to point out, the old guy she's referring to in that page is her father, who was kidnapped by Kurosaki. The point is that she basically becomes the token girl character in the story, and there are some moments where it feels like I'm in a different kind of genre. She drools over hotties. Yuzu is a lot less relevant in the story, and she's more of a ride-along character. But the bigger issue is, and this will tie into the last part, which gets its own section in this video, is the flirting and the oddity with her. I have to set the groundwork. There's a fair bit of romantic tension between Yuzu and Yuya, with Yugioh and Yuri kind of pushing the envelope, like saying Yuzu is Yuya's girlfriend. I have seen some complaints about the fan service in this manga, but the worst I've seen is when it comes to Yuzu is there being this accidental groping, which I don't really approve of because this is a 14-year-old girl and I don't find this funny, but when we get to the next issue we talk about really ruins the manga, while these moments make you go a little black. Of course, if you're just viewing from what I'm telling you, then when you've got Yuzu on the verge of confessing to Yuya that she fell in love with him, it probably seems a bit more innocent in that regard. But then after Yuya returns to the future, Yuzu meets a certain someone, a younger Yugioh Sakaki, Yuya's father. Yep, we're going back to the future here.
The hell with it. The real reason I ran over here is because I wanted to do this. There's my little Lois. What? Lois? Come on, honey, hop in Daddy's car.
Now, I'm sure that if you've been paying attention to what I've been saying, the manga makes the implication that Yuzu is Yuya's mother in the future. So, with scenes such as the flirtation, the accident I brought up, and a few comments by the brothers, it can make things a little off-putting to people. But it was left ambiguous so people could interpret it however they wanted. At least, until this page came out. A special chapter that effectively did confirm, yes, Yuya is the son of Yuzu.
Oh, hey, just gonna throw this out there. You're really cute.
Well, you know, my mom always said I was a cute kid.
Oh, a mama's boy, huh? I'll be your mommy.
This was the moment where the manga was ruined for so many people, that it certainly recontextualized a lot of the parts of the manga, and people, if they feel disgusted by that, should be allowed to feel that way. I certainly do not like this sort of twist. It does make things a bit uncomfortable when you look back on some interactions and events in the entire story, but I'm not going to lie, I have a bigger fish to fry with this ending. Though before we get into that, I need to explain something. I have a series of videos on this channel where I go into details about the female characters of the Yu-Gi-Oh series. I have yet to really talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! Reigns, and I'll be honest, I'm not the hugest fan of the direction of the General Rush series, so I may not even talk about those one day. The reason I am bringing this up is to highlight an issue with Yu-Gi-Oh! In all honesty, I love Yu-Gi-Oh! It's been a major part of my life, even if just as a pastime. Though, while the series has a lot of flaws, it's something that is close to my heart, and it's why I've gone out of my way over the last few years to really discuss the weaker elements of the series, but at the same time, there's a lot of great stuff to talk about it. It's why I took the time to really discuss the positives of this manga, because up until the end and the epilogue, there was a pretty interesting story that had a few failings here and there, but you could look over them. And that's why I need to discuss these issues. You shouldn't turn away from the negatives just because there's good stuff as well. The only thing I'd say is don't be obnoxious about it. So, with all that said, what is the bigger issue with this one page? Well, it's because it's something I really hate about female writing, especially in Yu-Gi-Oh! I went through a fair bit of stuff in the previous section with Yuzu, but to put it simply, Manga Yuzu is essentially a focal point for a lot of things I dislike when it comes to the writing of women in Yu-Gi-Oh! More ultimately, a lack of agency. Manga Yuzu is a bit of a flat character, and aside from conning Yuya to let her be involved, the most she does is exposition on what needs to be done. I brought up how she doesn't duel in the story, and while that's not a death nail for her character, it makes me roll my eyes since she's the daughter of a duel school. You're telling me she doesn't even have a deck? And at the end of everything, she's just destined to get with Yusho and one day become a mother to the U-Boys. No complaints, no issues with what just happened, no questioning if this is the right thing to do. She's just a vessel for the writing. It was destiny. You need to understand something about the original anime version of Yuzu to really get what I'm talking about. Yuzu in the anime was a really dynamic character in the first half of the anime. When she lost an important duel that could have cost her family the entire duel school they had, Yuzu went out of her way to make sure that she could be stronger to make sure something like that wouldn't happen again. We saw her train, we saw her learn, and when she defeated the same opponent later in the season, it marked her growth as a character. It may not sound like a lot, but it was a sign of things to come. You have a character who is being proactive in trying to improve a weakness. You shouldn't underestimate that, especially since a simple message that can reach a lot of people that even if you lose, you can still improve with hard work. And in the second half of the series, most of that went up in smoke. Gon was the character who had her own agency to take things into her own hands, turn into a damsel in distress who would only yell out to Yuya to save her, and in the end of everything, she, along with the other bracelet girls, were effectively killed off for a plan that screwed up. I bring up agency, but it's more like narrative agency. Yeah, these are stories, and the characters aren't real, but you want characters to actually not be puppets on a string because that's part of the illusion. And this narrative choice with Yuzu being destined to be Yuya's mother, to me it's just asinine. Especially when you consider that when you look at the dynamics that the U-Boys had as Yuya's brothers, and even Reiji becoming a more dynamic rival character, it feels like a slap to the face that some characters got a second chance to be better fleshed out. And you have to remember that the anime ran from 2014 to 2017. The manga's run was 2015 to 2019, so it was running concurrent with the anime at some point. And with Arc 5 having a terrible ending that was widely panned by fans, it was still fresh in people's minds. And then the manga ending happened. It just stings more for the character and the writing. It's not just that Yuzu was reduced to a predetermined destiny as a mother, stripped of the agency that made her anime counterpart so compelling in her early days. It's that this choice reflects a deeper issue in Yu-Gi-Oh's writing, a pattern of sidelining female characters, flattening their potential into passive roles or plot devices. The Arc 5's manga epilogue, confirmed by that special chapter, doesn't just recontextualize Yuzu's story, it undermines the chance to give her the depth and growth she deserved as a character. For a series I love, one that shapes so much of my passion, this feels like a betrayal of its own potential. Yuzu and fans like us deserved better than a twist that reduces her to a narrative afterthought. It's a reminder that even in stories we cherish, we need to call out lazy writing and demand more for the characters who inspire us. The Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5 manga was something. There were a lot of great things to it, and throughout the story, there were only a handful of things that kept it to the ground. At least until the additional ending, because even the duel between Yuya and Reiji was great. Does the one page in the epilogue ruin the manga for me? In a sense, yeah, it does. It's a reminder of how terrible the writing can be for women of Yu-Gi-Oh! And how there was a great chance to expand upon what the show had failed at. In some regards, yes, the manga does a lot of good for the characters by changing changing them up and twisting things. But at the same time, it also negatively affects elements as well, and it frankly gets tiring, especially when the same issues crops up, only with a different wrapping. A lot of people will often turn to the main writer of the manga, Shin Yoshida, for this issue. If that name sounds familiar, Yoshida is a composer and screenwriter who's been with the Yu-Gi-Oh franchise for years, even being the guy behind the Arc 5 manga story, as well as Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal's adaptation and the Yu-Gi-Oh! OCG stories. On a side note, from what I looked up, you can also attribute the Orichalcos art of Yu-Gi-Oh! To Yoshida, so take that information if you will. I have mixed thoughts on Yoshida's writing, because honestly, he did do some writing for characters I enjoy, and some interesting concepts as well, but there are obvious flaws too. The point is that I'm very mixed on the guy, and it should be obvious that after reading his work on the Arc 5 manga, it too leaves me puzzled with him as a writer. I suppose I'll leave this video with a question. If the journey of a story is enjoyable, but the ending leaves a real nasty taste in your mouth, and upon looking back, does some very questionable things in said story, is the tale still enjoyable? Regrettably, that's going to be up to each individual to make that declaration. In my research on this video, I found a surprisingly large amount of people who think the ending twist of this manga was good and fits the thematic ideas. Now, I think those people are nuts for liking it, but they're allowed to have that opinion even if I disagree with them. And just because this manga got tainted in the epilogue for me, that doesn't mean it'll be the same for everyone. Of course, most people probably won't see this video and believe I don't think anyone should enjoy this manga. Then again, most people who complain about my videos never actually watch the videos they yell about. In any case, thanks for your time. I'm Mangakamen, thanks for watching, and have a great one. Bye bye.